Let's get started. Looks like people are still rolling in. And again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rudy Shankar. I'm the director of the Energy Systems Energy Program, and this is part of our continuing series of energy seminar series that we started a few years ago, but it's become quite a hit. We invite students both from Lehigh and outside, and also industry folks. And this semester has been very interesting. We went from live audience to a remote audience because of this COVID-19, but it doesn't seem to have stopped the interest in attending these seminars. Again, a big welcome from you guys. I'm going to, the topic is Climate Action Plan. And let me get my slides going. I'll introduce the topic and what we're all about. What happened here? Trying to get my screen here. All right, I'm having some trouble getting the screen on my screen, so. Can you see the screen here, everybody? Say yes?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, good.
Yep.
Let me put it on full screen so it's a little easier to see. Yeah, how do I do that? All right. So again, this is part of our energy seminar series. We have Climate Action Plan will be presented by Lehigh University and Lafayette College. And all of us know about the climate challenge, and as has been stressed so often, all these challenges are met at a very individual level, an institution level, a city level. And as academic institutions, Lehigh University and Lafayette College have taken steps in that direction. And we'll have panelists from both the universities, and have 4 panelists speaking on the subject and kind of apprising you where we stand. And what is the role of the Energy Systems Engineering Group? It is a Master of Practice program located at Lehigh University. And our mission is to develop world-class leaders in energy. And there's no getting away that one of the most singular challenges that's facing students coming out in the energy field is the climate challenge. And electricity generation is one of the most polluted ways of generating energy, although that is changing quite dramatically these days as more renewables are coming to the marketplace and they're achieving grid parity. And so that's our role in sponsoring these seminars. So I just want to kind of give you a slight introduction on how we'll be running the show today. Each of the panelists will take turns to present their material. And first with Lehigh, talking about what are Lehigh's plans, and then followed by Lafayette College, and I'll introduce the panelists shortly. And we will be taking questions, but the way you should do this is there's a chat window at the bottom of your screen. Please type in the questions that you wish to ask. And if you know who you want to target, please indicate that too. But if you want to ask the general panel, that's fine also. Please note that in the chat window. And Susan and I will kind of go through the questions and pose them at the end of the talk. So we won't be taking questions during the panel discussions, but towards the end. And just so we can get the audio clearly, I please urge you, all the participants, to put your phone on audio on mute, except the panelists, of course. And let me go to the panelists we'll be talking today. From Lehigh University, we have Catherine Target-Gross and Doug Spengel. And let me introduce Catherine. She's a sustainability officer at Lehigh University. She recently took over this position. And in this role, she creates and leads the vision for Lehigh's sustainability agenda. And she is actively working to develop a coherent campus-wide sustainability strategy. And I've been part of the discussions with Catherine. I can definitely vouch for that. And before coming to Lehigh in January 2016, Catherine spent almost 5 years in public service, focused on environmental, energy, transportation, agricultural policy issues. Catherine holds a bachelor's degree in government and environmental studies from Franklin and Marshall College, and a Master of Public Administration and Environmental Science and Policy from Columbia University. Welcome, Catherine. The other speaker from Lehigh is Doug Spengel, and he's been working with Lehigh's facilities for about 3 years now. He supervises 14 facility employees that operate Lehigh's 2 central heating and cooling plants and an electric distribution system. They also perform energy efficiency projects, and you'll be hearing about that during this presentation. He's a member of the Lehigh Sustainability Council and a Lehigh University alumni. Prior to Lehigh, he held a similar energy management position at another university that prepared a climate action plan, performed energy efficiency projects, and purchased renewable energy on a large scale. Welcome, Doug. Now from Lafayette, we have Dr. Kira Lawrence. She's an earth and environmental scientist who studies patterns of past climate change as potential analogs for understanding what's happening today. She joined Lafayette's faculty in 2006 after earning her BS at Brown University. As a distinguished lecturer from International Ocean Discovery Program in 2016-2017, she was selected to share her scientific discoveries with audiences nationwide. She served as a co-chair of environmental programs, as chair of the Department of Geology and Environmental Geosciences, and as a member of the Environmental Working Group as the college's Sustainability Steering Committee. Kira obtained her AB in Earth Sciences from Dartmouth, Master's in Geological Sciences from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Lovely campus, Kira. And Brown University, and PhD in Geological Sciences from Brown University. Welcome, Kira.
Thank you.
And finally, Nick DeSalvo is also with Lafayette. He was a campus energy manager within Lafayette College Office of Sustainability since January 2017. He's leading efforts to track and manage energy usage to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In support of the college's Climate Action Plan 2.0. Prior to his current role at Lafayette, he served as the Director of Sustainability Initiatives for the Lehigh Valley Association of Independent Colleges. In that position, he served as a shared resource collaborating with departments, relevant committees, faculty, and students to advance sustainability as a core value across multiple campuses. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Rudy. Glad to be here.
You see that we have a very distinguished panel. They have a lot of experience, and they'll have 45 minutes each team to go through their presentation. And I just want to remind at the very end, after the Q&A, after the presentations, We'll have a poll just to see the effectiveness of such seminars. It's a way of guiding our program as we go forward. So without further ado, I'd like the Lehigh team, starting with Catherine, to come forward with their presentation. So
Great, thank
Catherine, I'll stop sharing and
Okay.
you have control.
Great, thank you. Present. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Earth Week. As many of you probably know, April 22nd, 1970 was the first Earth Day. So tomorrow will be the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Probably not how we anticipated celebrating Earth Day in a virtual environment, but since that day, it's really been focused on drawing attention to environmental issues around the world. This year, the global theme for Earth Day is climate action. So this panel discussion today, I think, is especially fitting. As Rudy mentioned, Doug Spangle and I will be presenting on some of Lehigh's energy efficiency projects and climate action and resiliency planning. So as you probably heard or recently saw, Lehigh University, Lafayette College, and Muhlenberg College and Dickinson made a big renewable energy announcement at the Climate Leadership Summit in Atlanta in February, late February. Lehigh's entered into a collaborative virtual power purchase agreement to buy renewable energy generated by a 200+ acre solar farm. This project, combined with other on-campus energy and efficiency projects, will enable Lehigh to match 100% of its current electricity usage with renewable energy. This partnership with the 3 other schools is the largest unaffiliated higher education group to purchase renewable energy as a collective. So this is one step forward for Lehigh as it moves toward carbon neutrality. So going back in time now a little bit, so in 2009, President Alice Gast signed a climate commitment that put Lehigh on a relevant path for the past 10 years. This climate commitment really created institutional policies and procedures to help manage the development and implementation of a university-wide plan that affirms Lehigh's commitment to protect and improve the environment, not only through teaching and research, faculty, student and staff service, and administrative operations. So through this climate commitment, Lehigh pledged to make environmental sustainability and climate change part of its overall mission and to set it as an institutional priority. So looking now at our Lehigh's current sustainability plan. So Lehigh's current campus sustainability plan, known as the Campus Sustainability Plan 2020, was released in 2016, and the goals mapped to this year, 2020. So there's 41 goals in this plan in 4 main focus areas: academics and educational experience, campus and community engagement, operations, and planning and administration. The focus area, obviously, with the goals related to greenhouse gas emissions and climate action, is in the operations focus area. As Rudy mentioned, in the fall, we launched the strategic planning process for our next sustainability plan, which I'll talk about in a moment. So within operations, Lehigh is taking action to increase efficiency, reduce emissions, and maximize capital investment. This infographic shows that Lehigh has made great strides to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions over the years. Between calendar year 2007 and fiscal year 2019, Lehigh has reduced its emissions by 24%. And this takes into account that gross square footage increased during that time. It's important to note that given COVID-19 and the impacts to air quality and electricity usage, which have been positive, we will not use any of the FY20 data to assess goal achievements or to establish any new baselines going forward. Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
So Lehigh does a greenhouse gas emissions inventory every year. What you're looking at here are the results of our last fiscal year's worth of information that concluded last June. We were at about 71,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And the main takeaway from here is that about 80% of our emissions are from our sort of direct and indirect energy use, the purchased electricity being the largest category, and then our on-site combustion, primarily natural gas, is our second largest category. And then if those two represent about 80%, the rest of these categories comprise about 20%. Next slide. So as Catherine mentioned, about 10 years ago, we started to work on climate action type projects, energy efficiency in particular. This chart is showing, if you sort of zoom through the middle of the slide, you're seeing a whole lot of different types of energy efficiency projects that we've done. I labeled this slide as just relevant to the last 2.5 years, which is the time period that I've been working at Lehigh. But I imagine these types of projects were going on before I came, and we'll continue to do these types of projects going forward in the future. The most common one that we're doing now, I'm just going to read a couple of the different projects here. I mean, changing existing lighting stock over to lighting emitting diodes is the most common thing that we're doing. We've been doing that for a number of years, and we've got kind of a few more years to to go. We're basically doing a couple of buildings per year as opposed to trying to tackle it all at once. Some of these other projects are aimed at reducing electricity usage. Some are aimed at reducing gas usage. The names above and below all the arrows sort of indicate what buildings or parts of campus we executed these different projects at. And I think many other schools around the country are doing all these same sorts of things. When we do these projects, we do like to do measurement and verification of the results. So typically when you launch one of these projects, you have some estimate of how much energy you're going to save. And then if you have sort of meters installed at the right place, you can confirm whether you got the expected savings or not. So on the next two slides, we show some examples where we have been sort of trying to verify the savings for particular projects. This slide's showing electric usage in one particular Lehigh parking garage facility over almost a 4-year period. So you see we had 3 years of approximately the same amount of electricity being used before we implemented a lighting replacement project. And we completed this project in August of 2019, right before the current academic year started. And so you see that in September and October on the yellow line, we started to see some savings. And at this point, about 6 months after completing the project, we have saved about 50,000 kilowatt hours. And we're expecting to save about 100,000 kilowatt hours over the course of the year. So this is a project that seems to be on track towards the expected amount of savings. On the next slide, we show kind of a similar looking graph, but the scale is different. Here we're looking at millions of kilowatt hours saved as opposed to what we're looking at on the last slide. Here again, this is the energy, or at least the electricity used in one of Lehigh's large laboratory buildings. There are actually 4 years worth of data shown here, although the blue line is pretty well hidden because it completely is overlapped by the orange line. So we had sort of 2 years of exactly the same electric usage profile. We started this particular project in sort of what's the middle of the time period represented by the gray line. So in sort of December or January of a little more than a year ago, we started saving some energy. We got a little bit of energy saved before the end of that fiscal year. We got a lot more savings when our next fiscal year started last summer. For this particular project, we implemented actually a whole series of HVAC-related initiatives over the course of a year and a half. So it was many different things that we did, not just one particular thing. And those combined things, we were expecting to save several million kilowatt hours a year. And what you're looking at here with the yellow line is that so far year to date, we have saved 1.5 million kilowatt hours from the combination of these projects. One other thing to mention is that this March period of time shown here was actually before our sort of campus shutdown due to the coronavirus situation. So we might get some unexpected savings from this measurement point forward, since we've now essentially closed our campus for a period of months. Next slide. So one thing we did as we were preparing to do a campus-wide climate action plan is we had some consultants come in and give us some recommendations for what to do in particular at our central plants. Lehigh has 2 central plants, which combined heat about 45 of our buildings, or about a third of our buildings, and they also cool about 15 of the major buildings. And so we were expecting to make some investments into the equipment and technology in these plants, but our consultants told us we would essentially get a better bang for our buck if we looked at doing more energy efficiency projects within each of the endpoint buildings that are served by these plants, instead of spending our first dollars on the plants themselves. So the hexagons represented in red and brown are showing 2 different recommendations they gave us for the heating sides of our plants, essentially better matching our boiler sizes to our different loads throughout the year, and trying to aim in the future towards distributing more hot water instead of steam. The next hexagons are showing recommendations for our chilled water systems. We have 3 different centrifugal chillers that are all more than 25 years old. The normal life expectancy for that kind of equipment is 25 years. So at some point we're going to have to invest in newer equipment. And when we do that, we'll also be changing our systems, which are somewhat based on constant speed pumping, to variable speed pumping in order to save energy. The final 2 hexagons over on the right are items that are sort of a little more long-term thinking and quite expensive. The consultants did recommend that we could be using the cogeneration system on our campus, but they were giving us payback periods of sort of 20 to 25 years. So we'll be doing a lot of other quicker payback things before we make that sort of investment. But the other thing they were telling us to do is to shift more of our fossil fuel-based campus loads towards electricity, with the idea that if you're aiming for carbon neutrality, you're going to want to shift away from on-campus fossil fuel use towards electricity. And then as the grid becomes more renewable-based over time, then our energy use will also be decreasing in emissions over time.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're currently in the final year of our Campus Sustainability Plan 2020. In the fall of 2019, Lehigh kicked off a 1-year strategic planning process for its next sustainability strategic plan. Throughout the winter, we assessed the current state of our current 41 sustainability goals to use that as a launching off point for our next plan. This spring, we've been working to set goals and develop metrics, have engaged with faculty, staff, students, and alumni. We held 2 campus workshops open to faculty, staff, and students in developing this plan. I also established an alumni advisory council for the Sustainability Strategic Plan 2030. So that's made up of 9 alums, and we've been meeting regularly. This summer, the plan is to take those goals and put them into the framework of a plan, and then to release that plan to campus sometime this fall. With COVID-19, things have been shifting a little bit, but we're still anticipating to be on schedule at this point. So as I said, this plan will be a 10-year plan. It's a longer plan than our previous 2 campus sustainability plans. It will be more forward-thinking and visionary, and that seems to be the trend in higher education. So at our December Lehigh Sustainability Council meeting, we did a brainstorming session on what the focus areas and sub-areas should be of the plan. I presented kind of 4 model plans to the Lehigh Sustainability Council. You can see the front covers here. I chose these 4 plans because they really were quite different from each other and provided a full spectrum of opportunities for how Lehigh could approach its next strategic plan. It went from super comprehensive in the case of Harvard to very operationally and goal-focused in the case of Princeton, to one that not only thought about the components of the plan, but also the governance for its implementation in the case of Northwestern. So the overwhelming feedback at that Lehigh Sustainability Council meeting was to limit the number of overall focus areas to 5 to 6, so that the plan isn't overwhelming, but rather easily digestible. The focus areas will be climate action, campus operations, educational experience, culture and engagement, health and wellness, and leadership. For each of the goals within each of these focus areas, we'll be aligning them with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Lehigh has a really strong partnership with the UN and has been working on a number of projects with UN missions in greening UN missions and working with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I only think it's appropriate to tie those into our next plan. As you noticed, in our next plan, there will be a whole focus area dedicated to climate action. It will include a couple of sub-areas: greenhouse gas emissions and resiliency, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and transportation. So a subcomponent of our overall Sustainability Strategic Plan 2030 will be the development of a climate action and resiliency plan, which will establish a carbon neutrality goal and will show how Lehigh will achieve that goal in the coming years. We recently got the necessary approvals to move forward with the development of this plan and are currently in the process of interviewing consulting firms and reviewing their proposals. But why is this important? So why should Lehigh be taking bold strides in the area of climate action? So there's four kind of main reasons: the science, the business case, student demand, and the moral imperative. So the science behind climate change, as we all know, and global warming is irrefutable. As the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said, the scientific evidence for warming of the climate system is unequivocal. The evidence is also clear. Global temperatures are rising, oceans are warming, shrinking of the ice sheets, glacial retreat, decreased snow cover, sea level rise, declining Arctic sea ice, increased extreme weather events, and ocean acidification. The business case is also clear. So developing a climate action resiliency plan really helps to improve organizational efficiency and decrease operational costs and reduce risk. It can kind of be seen as an insurance policy. It also helps catalyze increased giving and new funding sources. It can help attract, retain, and motivate top students and employees. It helps to demonstrate relevance in addressing grand challenges and can also be used to unify the campus around a shared sense of purpose. It strengthens community relations and facilitates new partnerships. It can also prepare students for career success and responsible citizenship. So it was Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, who recently said at the World Economic Forum, awareness is rapidly changing, and I believe we are on the edge of fundamental reshaping of finance. The evidence on climate risk is compelling investors to reassess core assumptions about modern finance. I also think it was interesting just in the last day or so, barrels of oil went into the negative. So it's a really interesting time to be in this field and see where this will lead us. So in addition to sort of the irrefutable scientific evidence and the business case, students are also demanding action. These are some statistics from various colleges and universities across the US. Students are valuing sustainability. On many campuses, they're actively boycotting unsustainable companies. 67% of students think sustainability is an important factor in where they go to school. 40% cite global climate change as the biggest challenge in the next decade, and 60% are interested in a sustainability career. And then lastly, there's the moral imperative. So the moral imperative is indisputable as the effects of climate change, including extreme weather, temperature changes, and rising sea levels, are felt most keenly by the global poor, who have also benefited the least from the economic activities that cause it. So moreover, climate change could accelerate poverty and inequality in the future, meaning that unless we address it in a timely manner, it will diminish or even eliminate future generations' chances to achieve their development goals. So the moral imperative. Oops. So for all of these reasons, and in support of Lehigh's 2009 climate commitment and the Sustainability Strategic Plan 2030, we recently finalized the scope of work for the Climate Action and Resiliency Plan. As I said, we're reviewing proposals now actively for the firm that will work on the draft of the plan. A steering committee and working committees will be formed on campus as part of the plan development. In addition, there'll be experiential learning opportunities throughout development of the plan and implementation. I'll also be coordinating with the city of Bethlehem as they recently kicked off the development of their own climate action plan. So I'll be representing Lehigh as a stakeholder on a stakeholder committee with the city of Bethlehem for their climate action plan. So there'll be coordination between Lehigh and the city throughout that process. So kind of in closing, I just wanted to direct your attention. So Lehigh, we'd like to invite you all to participate in Lehigh's virtual Earth Day keynote speaker tomorrow at 4:30. We're thrilled to have Joseph Robertson, the Global Strategy Director for Citizens Climate Lobby, giving a virtual presentation followed by Q&A. Again, it seems fitting to the global theme of climate action. So I'm sure Rudy or Susan, we can share this out after the workshop with you all. In addition, Lehigh, to this Earth Day event, Lehigh typically hosts an educational and engaging month full of events for the month of April. So although we can't physically be together on campus during this difficult time, we are proud to share other Earth Month events happening throughout April. We created a webpage on our Lehigh Sustainability website. It's the first thing you'll see when you go on the website, and it includes virtual events that are happening at Lehigh for Earth Month, as well as for at other colleges, universities, and organizations throughout the United States. So be sure to check that out. So I'd now like to transition over to Lafayette. So Lafayette has had the benefit of completing one climate action plan and is in the process of implementing the second plan. For both Lehigh and Lafayette, this is a significant undertaking. It requires buy-in and commitment across the university. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nick and Kira.
Great, thank you very much.
I'll unshare my screen.
There are lots of, I think, similarities between your arguments and also your plan. So I think it'll be nice to see the convergence of approaches here as we talk through the Lafayette version. I'll say that this is a version, kind of adapted version of the presentation that I and Roger Demoreski, who is our VP of Finance, basically the CFO for Lafayette, gave to the board trustees at Lafayette, to the full board. In anticipation of that, we had several meetings with the board's grounds and buildings committee just to get them kind of up to speed on sustainability at Lafayette, which was, I think, a very effective prelude to us presenting this plan to the full board and having it get unanimous approval last February. So I want to start by saying thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about Lafayette College's second climate action plan. We'll call it CAP 2.0. And I wanted to say that, this is Nick and I are presenting this to you today, but this was a very much campus-wide collaborative effort. As you noted, you are in the process of formulating a climate action planning committee, and I would say that committee was absolutely instrumental to kind of the endpoint that we got to. And I would note that we worked with the Stonehouse Group, which is a Lehigh Valley-based energy consulting firm that has worked with lots of higher educational institutions, and a lot of their efforts in helping us with the campus energy audit, et cetera, made its way into our final plan. So that effort was quite helpful to us, and I'm sure you were anticipating it will be to you. And so I'm going to actually pick up where Catherine left off with, you closed with the arguments for why. I led the presentation to our board with the arguments for why, and I think they kind of fall into three buckets. For me as a climate scientist, the ethical bucket is resoundingly compelling, and I would hope that that's true for most people who are living on our planet and watching the climate crisis unfold in real time, is at least the leading edge of it. But I think there are other arguments that we made to our board that they found actually quite compelling, that were not just about we should do this because of the moral imperative to do it. So Lafayette's college mission includes this statement. We hope to train students to develop systems of values that include an understanding of personal, social, and professional responsibility. And if we are going to actually live up to that mission statement, then I think that as educators at higher education institutions, it's incumbent upon us to train our students to become the leaders of tomorrow, right? We need to give them the skills that they're going to need to exist and solve problems in a very complicated world. And one of the most pressing issues, as I think is known by all on this video conference, is human-induced climate change. And so if we're going to deliver on our educational mission, then we really need to start teaching students how to live within environmental boundaries. As also will not be news to anyone on this call, the rising greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere are approaching this threshold that is set by the Paris Climate Accord. We're already in the 412 range right now, and we're rapidly moving towards 450 ppm. And as most folks I think on this call already know, there are some serious monsters that lurk behind the closet door once we get up above that threshold, right? Some pretty dramatic adverse consequences for human societies if we get up into the 3-degree warming range, which business as usual will take us to in the not so distant future, unfortunately. We are actually, as I think this audience probably mostly knows, I think watching the leading edge of the climate crisis unfold in real time with these catastrophic wildfires that are being seen in places all over the world, as well as more powerful storms that are requiring us to measure rainfall in feet and not inches. And so I would underscore kind of Catherine's argument that there's a pressing need for action to address the climate crisis. And I think the role of higher ed is to train the next generation of leaders to feel not only the urgency of that imperative, but also to feel like they are well equipped to step into these spaces of collaborating with others to address these kinds of really complicated interdisciplinary questions. So, from Lafayette's standpoint, we often play the game of comparing ourselves to our small college peers. And so many small colleges have already stepped into this carbon neutrality space, right? Colby, Middlebury, Bowdoin, Colgate, Dickinson, American have all already achieved carbon neutrality, and many other small colleges or Patriot League schools are also on tap to get to carbon neutrality in the not too distant future. And so I think this slide actually is probably the most compelling for Lafayette. As it's not lost on any of us in higher ed that the landscape is ever more competitive as the years move forward, and trying to ensure that you are not only helping your students be trained to confront the challenges that they will face, but also that you are offering the same type of opportunities at educational experiences as your peers, I think is a pretty important thing. So, I would argue that higher ed is working to try and seek to do what I argue we should do at the outset, which is to teach the next generation to address the climate crisis. But I would also underscore some of these broader institutional benefits that I think Catherine touched on in the Lehigh presentation. Right, there are opportunities at reputation. Princeton's Green Guide is a real thing, and there are many other metrics in which students are assessing the green credentials of higher educational institutions. There's an awful lot of student demand, and thank you, Catherine, for providing that nice summary of the national data. Just by way of example, in the sort of couple months leading up to us presenting the climate action plan to the board of trustees, some of our student environmental organizations started a petition on campus asking students if they supported climate action planning. In the span of like a month and a half, they had collected 1,300 signatures. That's about half of our campus community, right? And so it's a pretty impressive number on a short time frame of students who were behind this effort at Lafayette. And so I would submit that this next generation of leaders is one that is cognizant of the need for sustainability education and sustainability action. And then the third point here that I think picks up on a thread that Catherine already highlighted, but I just want to underscore the importance of. I think there are real opportunities of community building, not only within your own campus, but also between your campus and campus communities. Between the community external to your campus. Within our campus, not long after the board had given its blessing to our climate action plan, myself and Roger Demaresti, who was our VP of Finance and our Sustainability Office, were all getting calls asking us to come talk to the Development Office, asking us to come talk to Alumni Relations, and a lot of kind of people stepping up and wanting to know more about our climate action planning process and kind of rallying around this flag that we had placed, I guess, that was making a statement about who we were as a community. And I think that really was just such a affirming thing to see, just folks being so enthused about the new climate action plan. So our climate action planning process started actually under the previous administration. Back in 2007, Dan Weiss had gotten together some administrators and some staff members and worked with another kind of energy consulting firm to look at Lafayette's emissions. And in 2008, Dan Weiss, former president of Lafayette College, signed the President's Climate Leadership Commitment, joining something like 600 other schools at the time who had pledged to eventually achieve carbon neutrality. And you can see here in the kind of upper portion of our slide, our initial climate action plan, we call it Climate Action Plan 1.0, set some benchmarks for what level of carbon reduction we were going to strive to achieve by these different time horizons. As you'll see in a few moments, these were probably not nearly as ambitious as they needed to be, and they're not nearly as ambitious as our current plan. But I think I give a lot of credit to Dan and his sort of foresight to step into this space and kind of lay the foundation for the future efforts that we are now building on their initial work. Allison Biley, who is our current president, not only started our sustainability office in 2016, but in 2017 she signed the America We're Still In pledge, which was signed by something like 3,000 different institutions, including businesses and municipalities across the country, basically pledging that we're still in our support to support the levels of commitments that were espoused in the Paris Climate Agreement. And so this was an important, I think, signal to our campus community that our administration was serious about climate action. That was a kind of prelude to our more formal climate action planning. So I'm showing here on this slide our results from our first climate action plan 1.0. Our baseline year was 2007, and we did a snapshot. Well, we've been benchmarking all the years in between, but we did a comparison between 2007 and 2017. You can see the blue bars is 2007, and the green is the 2017 levels. As is true, and it sounds like it's the same at Lehigh and most other higher educational institutions that we looked at, most of our emissions come from either purchased electricity or heat and hot water use on our campus. In the time between 2007 and 2017, we had a 20% decrease in our campus emissions as a consequence of three things, two of which we actively sought to make happen, and one of which is we're fortuitous to be the beneficiaries of. So the first was that we did a bunch of energy efficiency projects. It sounds like many similar to what Lehigh has undertaken, changing lighting, changing over boilers, and things that we would get a pretty quick return on investment in terms of not only fiscal, but also in terms of the energy efficiency of it. The other thing that we did is we changed over the type of fuel that's used in our steam plant to a less carbon-intensive fuel. And then the third, so those are two actions that Lafayette took that moved the needle for us. And then the third is we benefited from the fact that Pennsylvania's electricity grid got to be less carbon-intensive, right? So those three things together helped us get to this 20% decrease in emissions. So our objectives as a climate action planning committee, and our committee started maybe a year before we actually got to talking to the board, right? We got to the climate action plan in the fall before we talked to the board, the sort of final version of it. But we had started this process of assessing our previous, existing climate action plan and what new objectives we wanted to undertake with the second version. So the goals in our second version of the climate action plan were to have our goals align more with our peer institutions and be more ambitious, right? We got to 20% of our emissions reduction in a decade, and I think our original benchmark was something like 15 or 20% by 2027, right? So we recognized that we could set more ambitious goals, and we wanted to be in line with our peer institutions and with what we, I think, institutionally recognized as an ever-deepening threat of climate change. We wanted to develop a strategy to get to carbon neutrality by or before 2035. Looking at many of our peer institutions who had gone before us to getting to carbon neutrality, we thought like that was a reasonable timeline to achieve the benchmark of carbon neutrality based upon how long it took a number of our peers to get to where they are from when they espoused this goal of carbon neutrality to actually achieving that outcome. And then in a moment, I'll turn over to Nick and he'll talk about the diversity of different approaches that we plan to employ in our climate action plan. But before I finish, I wanted to say a few things about the climate action plan and academics. And I would submit that this, I think, is in my view, one of the core reasons that an academic institution would go about this with gusto, which is that this next generation needs to know how to cope, and it is our job to teach them that. And I would say that we owe this to them as older generations who have not done very much about carbon. We owe this to the next generation to chart a course for them and to teach them how to work together to solve these problems. From Lafayette's own individual standpoint, we're a small liberal arts college with a fully fledged engineering program. That's a pretty unique space to occupy in the small liberal arts college landscape. And we really feel like climate action planning and our goals at sustainability and environmental stewardship are well served by our institutional character, right? We have this way to seamlessly integrate engineering and liberal arts to not only identify problems, but also to work to solve them in an interdisciplinary way. And we think that sustainability and environmental stewardship is a really great space for us to be stepping into. As a college, we have embraced sustainability as a core value. It sounds like Lehigh has done that as well. And we really feel like the second version of the climate action plan allows us to kind of walk the walk in that espoused and articulated value. Lafayette, as some of you may know, is currently implementing what we call our strategic direction. We are stepping into an educational space that is really seeking to highlight areas of focus that are relevant to solving the problems and dealing and coping with current challenges in the world. And so there are a variety of different initiatives, 6 different initiatives on Lafayette's campus, most of them in some interdisciplinary space in which we're seeking to step into a more leadership space. And so one of those is environment and sustainability. And so there are a bunch of faculty and staff and working groups that work to achieve these goals in each of these different areas. And the environmental working group articulated this vision, this academic vision, in which we are hoping to become a leader in the teaching and practice of environment and sustainability, and to become a leader in sustainability-focused collaborative research. And given our kind of unique character as a small liberal arts college with an engineering division, we feel like we're well situated to go after those objectives. We have already just, basically the semester after we had the climate action plan approved, already seeking to integrate climate action planning directly into the educational experience for our students. And so in capstone courses across our college, students from an economics capstone, also students in an engineering studies capstone, with 2 different divisions there, and then the interdisciplinary programs of environmental science and studies are incorporating climate action planning as a core part of their hands-on learning experiences that they engage students in. And so we have actually seen that be very productive as an educational space for students. The students in the capstone class that I co-taught this fall were very motivated to be working on something that would have direct relevance and benefit to the college. And we found that to be really resulting in really positive recommendations for us as we continue our climate action planning. So we see there's an opportunity for some real synergy between not only the educational experience for students, but also for our climate action planning to be fleshed out in a way that involves the ideas of students who are populating our campus and using their different disciplinary lenses to think about this problem. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Nick to tell you about the kind of nuts and bolts of our plan, and then you'll see me at the very end to kind of wrap up our plan. Nick, do you want me to advance your slides, or do you want to have me unshare and you share? Nick, you got to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
There I am. Now I'm unmuted. Why don't you advance them? Kara might be a little less disruptive if we just keep going.
Okay.
That works for you.
Okay, that's fine. All right.
So as Kara mentioned, I'm going to get into the sort of nuts and bolts of our strategy. But before that, I wanted to provide a little background, some general sort of overview of options for reducing emissions, and then talk a little bit about what we've seen our peers do, and then get into Lafayette's specific strategy. So on the left side of this chart, you can see the different emissions, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 emissions are associated with combustion of fossil fuels on campus. Scope 2 are indirect emissions associated with the electricity that we purchase from a local utility. And Scope 3 is kind of a hodgepodge of emissions associated with college finance travel and commuting and waste disposal. And so you can kind of follow the different colored blue lines going to the different options for reduction. So for example, for Scope 1 emissions, you can look at energy conservation, you can purchase carbon offsets, you can try to electrify your energy systems, or you can use biofuels. And so you can kind of check out the other ones for Scope 2 and Scope 3, but I just wanted to kind of provide a foundation for those that might not be familiar with when we're talking about different scope emissions. Next slide, please. So this is the, and I know it's a busy slide, but it hopefully conveys some information about what our peers do. So across the top, you can see that all the colleges but Amherst have already accomplished and achieved carbon neutrality, and included rows there that indicate when they signed the President's climate commitment and their neutrality date. A couple things that are of interest here in terms of strategy. You can see where Colby, Middlebury, and Colgate opted to switch to biomass, to go from burning fossil fuels to burning biomass, which is great if you're located in Maine or the upstate New York, but in terms of that being a scalable option for other schools in other regions, not so much. Amherst I included on here because they're kind of forward-looking. They're switching to a natural gas-fired CHP plant, but beyond that, down the road, they're looking to switch from steam to hot water using a ground source heat pump system, which is something sort of new and unique, although you can see where Colby and Colgate have both instituted and used that technology in individual buildings, but Amherst is looking to do it campus-wide. All the schools have done something with renewable energy on their campuses, either solar or biogas. Again, pretty consistently also got involved in off-site large-scale utility projects that conveyed RECs to them. And for those who aren't so familiar with RECs, they're renewable energy credits. They convey the use of renewable energy to the holder of those RECs. And a REC is equivalent to 1 megawatt hour of electricity. And so that's how the units in which they're conveyed. Everybody also did energy conservation measures. I mean, that's pretty standard. The schools also used carbon offsets to some extent, some more than others. You'll see over in the far right column under Dickinson that they took a different approach. Some schools have viewed carbon offsets as sort of the last resort to get rid of those pesky sort of Scope 3 emissions that they didn't really have another way to deal with. Dickinson took a different approach where they went big time into offsets to neutralize 70% of their emissions, and now they're going to take this time moving into the future to actually address the emissions associated with their scope 1 emissions from burning fossil fuels on campus. So there's multiple approaches. Carbon sequestration is something that Middlebury and Colgate have used as a strategy. Colgate to the extent and where that's neutralizing 28% of their emissions, and that's associated with forest lands that they currently own and have set aside that will not be developed and that they're going to manage in a responsible way. Some other consistent features or options that schools have tapped into is developing a green revolving loan fund to fund projects on campus where savings are captured and rather than going into the general fund are redirected back to invest in additional carbon reduction projects or energy conservation projects. And also green building standards are formalized on campus, which is a commitment to some version of LEED, typically LEED Silver building standards. Next slide, please. So this gets into the specifics of Lafayette's Climate Action Plan 2.0 and our emission reduction strategies, energy conservation and efficiency projects, pretty standard, establish a green revolving fund, also partnering with development and alumni offices on campus to take advantage of interest and directing additional funds towards the green revolving fund, and implementing emission reduction projects, looking at renewables, both on campus and offsite, evaluating fuel switch in our central steam plant, looking at installing a combined heat and power plant, and then also carbon sequestration. So those are the buckets, sort of the building blocks of our carbon reduction strategy. Next slide. So as part of approving the board approval of Climate Action Plan 2.0, the board provided seed money for us to start implementing energy efficiency projects. As Kira had mentioned, we had worked with the Stonehouse Group. They did a campus-wide energy audit that identified over 100 projects at a cost of $4 million. So we kind of just got our toe wet and took some of the best projects to get some momentum, I think, and to develop, show that we were able to move ahead and be successful with these projects. And so the first project was relamping the entire Kirby Sports Center with LEDs. You can see the paybacks are reasonable. They're all under 5 years. Another project that was a large-scale project was in our science center, where we rebalanced the exhaust systems for our fume hoods. And so those are both sort of around just under 4 years payback. The project that was the sort of the crown jewel and was the least expensive was installing a VFD on a 100 horsepower pump that circulates water in HVAC systems during both heating and cooling seasons. And that the payback on that, and that is not it's estimated at under a year, but we actually have a meter. So that's real data that we're using to make that. So it's not so much of an estimate. I feel pretty comfortable with that number. So those are examples of the first round of energy efficiency projects that we implemented under the Climate Action Plan. Next slide, please. And so a little background on green revolving funds for those that might not be familiar with them. They're pretty common in higher ed. Easily over 100 colleges and universities have gone with this procedure. It starts off with you need some infusion of initial seed capital to get started, invested in energy conservation and efficiency projects, and then capture the savings and any revenue generated from rebates back into the fund. And then also hopefully we'll be able to down the road direct some gifts and donations into that fund as well. And so it just continues to fund itself and allow us to implement additional projects on campus. Next slide, please. We talked about renewable energy, and Catherine mentioned the virtual PPA. And so I'm kind of jumping to the bottom of that slide first. We did the aggregation with Lehigh, Muhlenberg, and Dickinson. It eliminates 100% of our scope 2 emissions, which account for 47% of our total campus emissions. So that was a nice shot in terms of making a lot of progress in one move in a short period of time. As far as on-site projects, or obviously smaller educational demonstrations that'll show there'll be visible signs to visitors and to the students that we're walking the talk. And so there's a couple projects under consideration, at least initially when this Climate Action Plan was put together. We were looking at installing a ground mount system at our Metzger Athletic Fields complex, and then also a rooftop system on our Kirby Sports Center. Together, they would reduce emissions by 3 to 4%. So a small amount in the big picture, but again, important in terms of the visual that it provides on campus.
I might just interject. We in the academic side of the house see enormous educational value associated with those on-campus arrays in terms of having students engage with thinking about renewable energy. So a big benefit educationally from our standpoint.
Yep, very much so. Next slide, please. I talked about a central the steam plant fuel switch. We had already switched from number 6 fuel oil to natural gas, and now we're looking at how we go from natural gas to a less carbon intensive fuel source, looking at biogenic fuels. Biomass, like the schools in New England, doesn't really seem like an option for us in Easton. We're looking at other biofuels. Something that's sort of newish out there is called renewable fuel oil. It's something that Bates College actually has implemented and burned in their boilers since 2017. Our folks from our facilities department actually took a road trip up to Bates earlier this year to talk with the folks and see how that worked. And all the input that they came back with was that it was a reliable source and that it was something that could be burned without issues. It does have some challenges. It's really corrosive. So we require repiping with stainless steel pipes and stainless steel tanks for storage. And so it's not without some fairly sizable capital outlays. It would, in the end of the day, reduce our carbon footprint by 85% compared to natural gas. And so we're still evaluating that. But we would also still preserve our ability to burn natural gas as a backup if there was some issue with the supply chain and we, for whatever reason, weren't able to get deliveries. Next slide. Combined heat and power. So it's in our situation, our central steam plant operates during heating season and then shuts down in the summertime. And so to justify the cost of a CHP, it really needs to operate year round. It's a sizable capital expense. To do that would require us to install new underground piping, both for hot water and for chilled water. And so I would see that we would look to hire a consultant to do an engineering feasibility study to really evaluate that, to look at life cycle cost analysis, to also evaluate the existing remaining life in the existing boilers in our steam plant and come up with a strategy of how best to move ahead in the future. Next slide, please. I mentioned, excuse me, carbon sequestration previously. And so this refers to planting trees in areas where forests were removed. Duke and Cornell have done that. On my slides earlier, I showed that Middlebury and Colgate relied on this strategy for reducing emissions. It's one of the options that we have included in our strategy for moving ahead. It would require us to plant trees or to buy existing forested land. And so that's something that we're doing is sort of down the road, but something that is on our radar screen to think about. The next slide, please. So this is a graph. This was prepared about a year ago when we prepared the Climate Action Plan 2.0, and it shows over time implementation of our strategy. We're starting out at about 25,000 metric ton equivalents of CO2 emissions. We, in the 2019-2020 timeframe, we were going to implement energy efficiency projects and focus on that. And then starting in 2021, look to get involved with renewable energy projects on site. And so we're still in the process. Actually, we're in the process of preparing a contract for a developer. We've selected a developer for the on-site project, and we're in the process of negotiating that contract, which hopefully will be done by the end of June. So that's moving forward. The next big drop in 2022 reflects the 47% reduction in campus emissions associated with the virtual PPA agreement that we signed in February, along with the other 3 schools. Moving ahead through 2024, we were doing, that's when we expected to implement the campus solar project. The following year, we're looking to increase the student enrollment by approximately 400 students over the next 3 or 4 years. And so we showed a little bump up to account for the additional emissions we expected with the expanded enrollment. Other potential opportunities we are in the process of looking at. We have been talking with some folks that are looking at installing a small flow hydroelectric system on one of the Near Eastern. And so that's out there as a possibility to help us further reduce emissions. And then in 2030 was the CHP potential installation. And then 2033 was a fuel switch for that CHP to a biogenic fuel source. And then finally, in 2035, to use carbon offsets and sequestration to get us that final sort of small, approximately 8%, maybe 8 to 10% we expect to have remaining that we need to deal with at the end. Next slide, please. So here's going back to that busy slide. I've added Lafayette in the far right column to show our strategy versus some of our peers in terms of, there's the hierarchy of efforts to reduce emissions pretty much is you look at avoiding and reducing emissions through energy efficiency and energy conservation. You look to switching to renewable sources of energy to eliminate emissions, and then sequestering or offsets to reduce the remaining sort of small remaining amount of emissions associated with pretty much your scope 3 emissions for travel and commuting and waste disposal. And so it's the exercise for me to put this together was kind of informative. I mean, one of the things we don't cover is green building standards, and I think that's something we really seriously need to consider for any future buildings and renovations. So that'll be a recommendation that I intend to provide up the chain. But otherwise, that pretty well, I think, summarizes what our strategy was. It's a living document. I mean, there are going to be obviously some twists and turns as we learn new things along the way, but that's our approach. And then I think that's the next slide is you, Kira.
Yeah, so we are finishing off our renewable energy projects and efforts, and Nick can speak to that more directly than I can. But we, as you noted, started with some energy conservation projects. We've stepped into this renewable space in a pretty significant way. There are more conservation projects that are afoot through our sustainability office and also our facilities office in collaboration. They're kind of looking at the different recommendations that Stonehouse Group made and some also internal assessments about what the next projects ought to be on the docket. I think the fuel switch to dealing with our heat and hot water challenge is something that is something we are spending quite a lot of time thinking about. Right, there are a variety of different strategies. None of them seem absolutely optimal from our standpoint, but we're looking into a number of those, and probably will task some of our students, especially in the engineering division, with thinking hard about that problem as well. We have some folks who work on biogenic fuels in our chemical engineering program. So our green revolving fund is underway, and we're working with development to acquire some additional resources beyond what we got from the savings of the energy efficiency projects. And as I noted at the end of my earlier remarks, we are really looking to enhance the academic collaborations, and that is fully underway between a number of different academic divisions and professors across different programs in the college, working pretty closely with our sustainability office and also with our campus facilities. So we're very, very excited about the opportunities in that space. So in summary, we are determined to achieve carbon neutrality by 2035. Beyond energy savings, we think that this is an awesome opportunity to serve our educational mission well and to enhance our institutional reputation. As Nick noted and took you through, we have a phased approach in which we do conservation, followed by our green revolving fund and some fundraising, and then implementing these key different elements of our strategy. So starting out with the solar efforts and then working to advance the heat and hot water piece of our puzzle later on in the plan as we continue to evaluate what our options are there. We're feeling pretty energized, even as the boots are hitting the ground here 1 year in, and are looking forward to continuing to implement the plan and use it to further our educational mission. We will report every year to the college's board of trustees, and we'll seek to update our climate action plan every 5 years. As Nick noted, I think these climate action plan documents for every institution are living documents because the technology is evolving quite rapidly in some of these spaces, and we want to make sure that we're incorporating the best R&D outcomes into our plans to advance the college's mission. So with that, we'll conclude our presentation, and thank you for your attention, and look forward to the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Lehigh, and thank you, Lafayette. This was a very comprehensive talk, and climate change is a formidable problem. It's behavioral as much as technology, and at least in the first go-around, meeting the Paris Accords of 450 to 1990 standards, it seems we're fighting a losing battle, but we should not give up hope. And I think ultimately the academic institutions like Lafayette and Lehigh need to take the lead, not only in cultivating students, future generation who take an active interest. And so we've got a number of questions, and I'm going to pose this to both the university colleges and university, that how do we, I know we heard about the green revolving fund as an incentivizing good behavior, as it were. There was a larger question, can we establish scholarship based on student actions in taking greener steps, saving energy and showing initiative as an individual or as a team? So this question came from Jason. Can you guys talk to that, each of the panelists?
I think I can speak a little bit to that from a Lafayette standpoint. So, we are planning to work collaboratively, not only with our students, but with other faculty from other divisions of the college on sustainability-related scholarship. By way of example, my colleague, Ben Cohen, so I'm a geologist by training. I co-teach our environmental capstone course. One of the people who co-teaches our environmental capstone class. And I've done that with a colleague in our engineering studies program who is a historian of agriculture. But both of us are deeply committed to sustainability. The very first time we did that class, we worked on an initiative that was about behavioral change on our campus, in our campus culture and our campus community. And we had just an amazing group of students who were working on that project. And we worked with some administrators of the college and one of our colleagues who's a social scientist who has been surveying our students every spring about their perceptions of sustainability initiatives at Lafayette and their own knowledge of sustainability at Lafayette. And collaboratively across 3 different departments and with some of our now recent graduates, wrote a paper that we had in the International Sustainability and Higher Education Journal. And we imagine that we would do more of that, using our capstones as a way to not only teach our students, but as a way to kind of share the work that we've done in this educational space of sustainability, advancing our sustainability goals, but also advancing our educational goals, and starting to have there be some sustainability-focused publications that come out of these educational experiences, as well as out of our more traditional, labs and research efforts on campus. I think one of the challenges institutionally is that historically we haven't really been engaged in that in a very directed way. And so, I imagine this is the same at Lehigh, but the kind of scholarship guidelines that are associated with each department or program or even division of the college certainly need to be reflective of honoring those efforts in a way that would incentivize faculty to be participants in those types of collaborative projects. And that's something we have engaged our, the environmental working group at Lafayette has engaged our administration with, and that we plan to try and embed, those types of products, right, the publications into scholarship guidelines at the institution as a way to designate or reflect the value that the campus places in those efforts.
Thank you. Lehigh, you want to respond?
Yeah, I can add to that. So thanks, Jason, for your question. I think there's a couple pieces to it. So you're asking about, if we considered an incentive program for students, faculty, and staff to reduce their individual carbon footprints. That's something that has been part of the conversations of our Sustainability Strategic Plan 2030 goals. That and other incentive programs and potential offset programs. Dickinson has a program where where faculty, staff, and students can opt in to offset their air travel for study abroad experiences, for research experiences. University of Florida has a commuting program where there's a payroll deduction to offset faculty, staff, or student commutes onto campus. So those are a couple of models. Another model, like you mentioned, is the incentive program. So all of those things are being discussed and considered as we've been developing the goals for our next plan. Just touching on the Green Revolving Fund, Lehigh has a Green Revolving Loan. It has not been utilized to the extent that it should be. And while I was at the Climate Leadership Summit, I attended a number of sessions to understand, how we could improve it and how we could further it on campus. And so there will be a number of actions that will be taken as we roll out our next strategic plan to kind of convert that Green Revolving Loan into a Green Revolving Fund, having an advisory committee and things. And the hope is to be able to tie that fund to our climate action and energy efficiency projects. We'll also be working with development and alumni relations this summer to put together collateral and a comprehensive kind of cohesive strategy for our frontline gift officers to be able to talk about sustainability, and I would envision tying some of those fundraising opportunities back to the Green Revolving Fund, like Lafayette has mentioned. And so all of those things are ongoing as well. And part of that momentum has been built up through the Alumni Advisory Council that we established for our Sustainability Strategic Plan 2030. We saw much more momentum this year for Lehigh's Giving Day around sustainability than we've seen in the previous couple of years that we've participated in Giving Day. We had more than 4 times the amount of Giving Day donations for Lehigh sustainability this year. So we're looking to continue building that momentum going into the summer as we more formally develop that strategy with development and alumni relations.
Okay. Another question, somewhat related from Benjamin, is how do the respective plans from Lehigh and from Lafayette, how do they compare with the bigger boys like MIT or Harvard? Is there a comparison basis?
I would say, I don't know, we have tended to compare more to our small college peers, right? So I don't know the data relative to MIT. Nick, you've looked more at our peer comparisons, but I'm not sure that those schools have made it into your accounting or assessment.
Yeah, not to any real extent, other than what I can offer is that both of those are more urban campuses, and so that has some influence on the options that are available to them in terms of their strategies, as well as much larger than us, and also have considerably more research space that's energy intensive compared to us. And so they've got a big challenge. I mean, we do as well, but it's even more of a challenge, I think, at that scale and being urban.
I guess I was more interested in the issue of how political attitudes of students on either different campuses or nationally, by nationally I actually meant all 18 to 21-year-olds, compare to attitudes at Lehigh/Lafayette.
Yeah, it's a good question, Ben. So Lehigh, we did a student opinion, kind of a behaviors, attitudes, and awareness survey a couple of years ago, and asking questions about, the urgency of climate change, what are their opinions on climate change, and over 50% of the students felt like climate change will be a major problem in their lifetime. So it's kind of in line with some of the statistics you see out there about Gen Zers, the Gen Z generation, and how sustainability and climate change more specifically they see as sort of
essential or critical to their lifestyle and to their careers. So it's a very different generation than even the millennials and sort of the Gen X and Boomer generation. And so we are seeing that in surveys at Lehigh. We plan to do another one of those surveys this coming academic year to compare over the last couple of years.
And I would just echo what Catherine said. My colleague, Andrea Armstrong, who's a social scientist, has her environmental policy class every spring, do intercept surveys with students in our campus community, which, involves a range of different class years and a range of different majors and whatnot. And I would say that our data are pretty consistent with what Catherine just articulated, right? This next generation of students is not unclear about the climate crisis and would like our institutions to do something about it. And many of them want to be involved in helping make those changes. And I guess I'd say, based upon the data that Catherine shared, in her presentation, my recollection of the data that Andrea has collected, they're fairly consistent with this national trend.
Okay. A question from Daniel. Have we considered, I suppose the plans, have they considered passive or net zero buildings? I know this discussion came up at one of the Lehigh meetings with the dean. So net zero buildings, have they been considered?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, our current sort of standards have focused on LEED, silver or better, or equivalent standard for new construction. We've also been looking at and pursuing a Fitwel certification for our new health science and technology building. That certification really focuses more on sort of the human experience around health and well-being in the built environment. In terms of passive and net zero emission buildings, there have been conversations about it on campus, and it's something that we're considering and looking into. There have also been conversations around kind of the operational carbon versus embodied carbon, and looking at, operational carbon is what we think about in terms of building energy consumption, but embodied carbon is looking at sort of the manufacturing, the transportation and installation of construction materials. So as part of our next plan or sustainability strategic plan, we'll be looking to kind of develop a policy for assessment to evaluate existing buildings, renovating them versus new construction, and thinking about and balancing that embodied carbon aspect of it to determine, what makes more sense for particular buildings and in terms of the overall carbon impact.
As I'd say, from a Lafayette standpoint, as Nick noted earlier, we don't as yet have a comprehensive plan about a green building standard on Lafayette's campus. We did just build the Rockwell Integrated Sciences Center that is LEED Gold certified science building. And so I think there is interest and commitment by our administration to be thinking in a greener direction in terms of campus buildings. But I don't know that we have stepped into the net zero building space yet. That's a pretty high bar, and not that we are adverse to it, but that's a lot to think about from the standpoint of new construction. Nick, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you characterized it accurately. It is a sort of a next step up kind of thing. And so we just got done with the science building, and I think that'll probably be part of the conversation as new construction develops down the road. But yeah, it's something off in the distance at this point.
So I just want to kind of articulate one last question, broaden the scope of that. And is there anything about our present experience with going through COVID-19 was showing how much we have to act as a community, a kind of a key indicator of what would be required, in later years as climate change does come upon us, we feel these worldwide issues as we are feeling right now on COVID-19. Any lessons learned that we can take today?
I would be very happy to step into that space. I thank you, whomever asked that question. This I think is an acute experience of learning about what happens when we don't pay enough attention to scientists who are warning governments about what's to come if we don't, modify our behavior in a way that will safeguard our communities. And this has been a very unsettling spring for me as a climate scientist because while I think the COVID-19 pandemic is an acute example, right? Very rapidly, we are cloistered away and social distancing, and it's had a dramatic impact on human health and a dramatic impact on our economy. I think that the climate crisis quite similarly will result in a fundamental reshaping of how human societies are, how we function. And that if we don't get moving right now, to address this issue, it will be very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle, right? From a COVID-19 perspective, we are all hoping that there will be a vaccine that comes, and given our history of strong, as a human society, to develop the ability to develop vaccines and in fact execute that plan, while it will take time, I think the history of science and public health has demonstrated that is a likely outcome. I think the tipping points that I showed in the slide at the beginning of my remarks, some of those genies don't go back in the bottle, right? And we don't want to get to these places where we don't get to go backward, right? Rising sea levels will have a very dramatic impact on coastlines the world over. And given the number of people who live in those places, that's not a very easy thing to think about how we cope with that eventuality if we fail to reduce carbon emissions. Just by way of one example, right? You could play the same game with food supplies and other critical systems that humans are dependent upon. And so I think that as dramatic and distressing as this moment is, it has profound things to teach us about the importance of heeding warnings from the scientific community and of acting with sound policy based upon the best scientific evidence to prevent and these dramatic crises that are the rhythm of our time. And so I'm hoping that this has been a wake-up call for policymakers about the importance of listening to the scientific community and the recommendations that the scientists are making in terms of making policy, even though that may result in some economic decisions that may have seemed not terribly palatable.
Yeah, you want to take this excellent answer, Kira.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
can speak to that a little bit from sort of the energy perspective, because Lehigh essentially went to online teaching during our spring break timeframe, which was about 6 weeks ago. And one of the first things the administration was asking me to do after we made that switch was to start tracking the energy that we're sort of saving in our buildings as a result of not really having faculty, staff, and students around. That's not completely true. We actually still have several hundred students on our campus at this time because some of them were not able to go home, not able to travel. But we haven't actually saved all that much energy yet. We're coming off the end of winter. Spring we thought was here, but it's actually still dropping below freezing at night. And so we are still heating all of our buildings. We have implemented some nighttime and weekend, things that we would normally do to set back temperatures when people are not around. We have done that, but we haven't seen a whole lot of energy savings from that just yet. We expect to see more of that in the coming months, but it's not a huge significant percentage of our normal usage.
Well, on that note, thank you again. I'm going to launch, there's one nice thing about this remote teaching is we can do these polls and they're done quite efficiently, but let's see if we can. This is the second time I'm trying this. It was basically to look at how effective we are in running these seminars, what we could do better. and your suggestions. So I'm going to launch this polling, and each of you hopefully can see this on your screen. Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll wait till you all finish and I can share the poll results so you get real-time results. This is like watching a horse race here. Okay, we're almost there. We're waiting for one more. I suppose we're not going to get that. So, end polling, share results. So I don't know if you can see this. Obviously, quite a lot of consensus around very informative and useful. Thank you again, panelists. The speakers were very knowledgeable about the subject. Pretty good score there. And the presentation content made it easier to follow the speakers. Again, very good. So with that, I'll conclude this panel discussion. Again, thank you, audience, for participating. Thank you, speakers, for your words of wisdom. And definitely, you guys, both the university institutions have very ambitious plans, and obviously, the students are as much a part of as stakeholders as everybody else. So thank you again.
Thank you for the chance to participate. We enjoyed it.
Thank you, Rudy.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Rudy.
Thank you, Rudy.
Oh, the recordings would be made available, so it should be early next week or so. We'll have the recordings available.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.